Hello, welcome everybody to this event where we're launching our second book. No, gotta get right in the camera. Team Coaching Edge, launched a couple of weeks ago. We thought we'd run a little webinar to talk about the book and team coaching and what it's all about. Let's start with some introductions. Tim, do you want to start by introducing yourself as our esteemed guest today? Tell us a bit about you.
I'm Tim Sprague. I'm a psychologist and a coach. I'm based in Australia. I'm also the president of the International Coaching Federation, not for the world, but for Australia and New Zealand. And I work from time to time as an associate with Jenni and Alison.
You do a lot of work for us, don't you? Alison, do you want to say hi as well?
I'm one of the authors of Team Coaching Edge. I'm delighted to be with you here today to share some of the thoughts and that were behind writing of this book and some of our examples to help you think about team coaching in a different way.
Yeah, lovely. I'm Jenni Miller. Ali and I are business partners. We've launched Management Dynamics together and written this is the second time we've written a book together, Ali.
It is.
It's amazing. We're still speaking to each other after writing 2 books.
Planning the third very distantly. So
absolutely. So Management Dynamics, our consultancy, is a small but mighty consultancy that works with clients around the world doing things like team coaching, but also leadership development and things like that as well. Ali, tell us a little bit about why we wrote this book. Why did we do it? Why we wrote a second book?
Yeah, so as you've said, it was our second book. So the first book did so well. It was aimed at leaders. It was all about synthesizing our experience, all our research, our data, our framework of Advantix into a book aimed at leaders to help them take their teams to high performance. But what we've done in our consultancy is we've trained up many of our consultants in team coaching and our approach to how you get teams to high performance over a specific period of time using Advantix. And what we noticed was there was a big gap in the market. There are some books around on team coaching, but really having something that gave you tools, practical insights, linked to the competencies that have been identified as critical to be a good team coach, there was nothing really holding it all together. So we would say that, this was really targeted at people who want to become team coaches, whether internally in organizations or externally. They can be leaders who want to be team coaches as well as the leader of their team. But it's very much aimed at a practical handbook to help you be that. So that's what we did and it built on everything that we've been doing. We love how we've shared lots of tools and techniques in it. If I missed anything, Jenni, about why we did this book, and also for the fun of it, we get to go off to Spain and write for a week.
There was a big part of that where we basically, our writing process is to go off and hide away in the south of Spain in the sunshine.
No.
This time it didn't work, did it? We went a little bit earlier last year, and the weather was awful. And actually, what ended up happening was we ended up writing the whole book in that week because we had nothing else to do other than write. We were stuck on the side of a mountain, weren't we, Ali?
We were. It rained the whole time. It was grim. We couldn't even get out of the place because we were stuck on the side of a mountain. So it was very good in terms of a retreat to write a book because, that was us.
Quite fun though. Although it's a full-on process writing a book, and we talk about what the third book might be, and I haven't got the words at the moment to write anything more, so it'll be a little while before another one comes out.
I think this is a fun one, and the response we've had is really positive. So I think from the early readers of it, Tim, thank you very much for your initial feedback on it, has been really positive, and we're getting a good response from the market too since it's been launched.
Yeah, Tim, from your experience and perspective, you've kind of, like most of us, started off as a one-on-one coach and kind of moved into team coaching, if I'm right. Yeah, what is it about team coaching that you like, and how does that compare to your one-on-one practice?
I've found that you can make a lot of progress with individuals, but when you start to apply a systems thinking frame to organizations, what often happens is you do great work with the individual and they dive into the team and the team changes them back. So there's a real advantage in working on, if not the whole system, a big chunk of the system, an intact team, and getting them to work not just on their own behaviour, but their interpersonal behaviour and their routines and their methods of working, so that they establish new routines together rather than each of them individually trying to work on it and then pushing against each other and their norms and their old ways of doing stuff when they try and introduce something new. It's so much better when they're all in the room.
Yeah.
And that really resonates with me, because one of the things Ali and I have talked a lot about is how powerful team coaching is for leadership development, actually. And for, and whereas, I mean, we're big, absolutely massive advocates, obviously, of individual coaching still as well, but just how much more impact team coaching can have on leadership capability. Because often we're working with teams of leaders and leadership teams, and obviously also always the leader of the team, and so much of their world is, of course, leadership. And so working, as you say, at that system level can make such a big impact across a relatively large number of people, and then the ripple effects of that across the organisation can be massive too.
Yes, and that's the next advantage, which is each of those people you work on in the team you work on works in other teams, and that ripple effect then starts to spread out. Yeah. And you're absolutely right. That starts to really change the culture of an organisation, kind of through osmosis.
Yeah.
I think there's another bit here too about when you were saying about building leadership capability. Sometimes when you coach people one-on-one, there's a little bit of them telling the good story of themselves. It's like, well, this is what I did and this is how well it worked. And when they're in the room with everybody else and they're saying, this is what I did and this is how well it worked, and everybody in the room is shaking their head, you're getting immediate validation from the team. Oh, well, maybe the way you thought that landed isn't the way it landed with everybody else.
Yeah.
And they're getting used to getting feedback, and it's increasing their radar, their emotional intelligence, and they're honing their leadership skills by seeing how they affect others.
Yeah,
I love that too. Yeah, I definitely see that. So if you're coaching a leader, say you have the choice of just coaching the leader one, or doing team coaching with the leader of and the team as well. Yep. There's something about you seeing them in action in the dynamic that they have with the team that also helps you to help them to notice some blind spots they might have, or to bring for you to notice that dynamic and kind of bring it into the coaching process. That can be so powerful, can't it?
Well, I think it creates much better self-awareness for not just the leader but for all the members of the team about the impact when you're team coaching rather than individual one-on-ones. Because to your point, Tim, I mean, when you are coaching one-on-one, it is just that person's perception that you're getting as information as a coach, and you can challenge it and get them to think about what other people might be seeing. But when you're in that dynamic of the system itself, it starts to really come alive for people. But I think also the other interesting thing about team coaching is it's not the leader having to bear it all on their shoulders either. There's something very much more about shared ownership. So, I've found in leadership development, when you're just working with the leaders and saying, and you have to go and lead your team and be this great, inspirational, motivational leader, it's all on them. Yes. And how do you get them to say, actually, it's not? I mean, motivation is something from inside each individual. You can't force somebody to be motivated. So asking a leader to do that for all their people is really hard. But actually to do it with their people and through their people is something different. And that's where I think team coaching really unlocks a difference, because it's not all on the leader's shoulders. They have an infrastructure and a toolkit and a way to do it, but it's not all of them. They're sharing it with the team. So that's where there gets that power, I think. I mean, what do you think? Is that mad?
Well, I agree totally. I think the old literature, and this is not in the book because you guys have moved on from that, was that leadership was something that leaders did to people.
Yes.
I'm leading you.
Yeah.
You know, I'm in charge and I'm leading. If no one follows, then it's not leadership.
No.
Leadership is a relationship between the team and the leader.
Yeah.
And that's what team coaching gets at. It gets at working on that relationship. And you're right, the shared ownership that you said, Alison, I think is really clear that it's one of the things you can work on in team coaching that you can't work on when you're working with an individual leader.
Yeah. And it's not servant leadership either, because that's a language that gets tossed around, which is the leader is in service of the team and all their direct reports. I think it's much more of an equal partnership. Yeah. And that's what we're trying to get to here is we're all partners in this. And we all have a shared accountability and ownership for that and different roles in the team.
Yeah, it's a do with process rather than a do to process, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Why do you think there's been this growth in team coaching, though, Tim, over the last, I mean, it seems to be over the last 10 years, there's been an increased interest in it?
I think we need to get more performance out of teams, and the focus is moving more onto the performance of teams than of individuals. And again, if you don't have the whole team in the room, then you can't work on the performance of the team. And so, you know, you can work on individual behavior, and each person can be setting their goals more clearly, and they can be, working on their interpersonal skills. But the team isn't working any better. And the team seems to be more in the modern world, the unit of production too. You know, it's not a group of individuals. It's a team that need to come together with different sets of skills. And for them to be a high-performing team, they have to know how to work together properly, and you need them together to do that. And I think that's where the real advantage comes in.
Yeah. What about you, Jenni? Where's your thoughts on this? Where's it come from and what's the impact?
I think it's probably building what you've just said, Tim. I think organisations are really realising the power of collaboration, and it's a competitive advantage that in order to solve first-time complex problems, they need human beings that can work interdependently with others, that can, as opposed to independently from others, which I think is the old paradigm, is getting people to be as efficient as possible by just doing their job without other people having to get involved. And actually that's great if you've got a repeatable, simple process. But I think so many organisations now, and the rate of change that we're seeing in the world doesn't allow for that to happen anymore, and stay ahead of your competitors. And so it's about, for a lot of organisations, it's about how do we create groups of people that can come together to solve an organisational problem that will take us forward and fast. So that's where you need really good collaboration skills, and you need teams that can come together, solve that problem, potentially disband again. You know, I think there's so much about collaboration that I think organisations are really seeing that as the massive competitive advantage that they can use. I
was going to say, I think collaboration is a real key, because there's so many complex problems now that not everybody's got the knowledge and skills to answer them on their own and solve them. So we need collaboration to come up with solutions. And I think one of the challenges for teams and in organisations is, where does collaboration really add value? Because this isn't suddenly about making everybody work on everything all the time. And many teams that I know we all work with, but, you know, I can name loads of teams, if I were to now, who all moan about how many meetings they're in and how much they have to spend talking to other people. And part of that is really value-added stuff for, you know, collaborative problems that they need to move things on and keep each other informed and everything. But there's an awful lot of it that actually is not, and it's getting in the way. And I think mature, high-performing teams are able to have a conversation and have a process to evaluate where it's going to add real value for whatever reason. So it might be because there's only that way to solve that problem. Or it might be that you're wanting to create some backups and share the knowledge more widely in the team. So it doesn't have to be just to get that task done. There can be other reasons you collaborate. But also, where do you find some efficiencies and free up people's time? Because the other thing is people need to have space to think. And if it's task, nobody's got any capacity to think and get a perspective. So I think that's another real benefit from team coaching is we get people and challenge them to think about, where do we work together? Where don't we work together? And how do we get space to review and think about what we're doing so that we can become more productive? We can get that edge that, high performing teams have.
Another one that's popping up for me is kind of similar to the kind of solving complex problems, but it's more generative than that, is innovation.
Yes.
So I think a lot of, I think McKinsey did a study about, I think 84% of CEOs said that innovation was critical to their future success as a business. Right. And if you think about it, innovation doesn't happen by one person. One person might have a spark of an idea, but in order to execute that in an organization, you need to collaborate with others and you need to harness the collective wisdom of a bunch of people to make it happen. And so that's where teams come in. That's where collaboration comes in. And I think that's another reason why I think organizations really recognize that for innovation to happen, you have to be working together.
Yeah. And you also have to take the stress of, fast-paced tasks all the time, because you need to give people space to be creative and innovative. You don't need to give them weeks and months, but just small chunks of little bits of time, half an hour here or an hour there, where nothing else is coming around, and then allow and enable that team just to innovate and come up with the ideas and build on those ideas and then take them to fruition. And like you said, one person can't do it. The things are too complex to get all the way.
I think the other thing that pops up for me is organizations for years have been very interested in engagement. They've understood how important engagement is for retention of people, for high performance and all the rest of it on an individual basis. And I think that the focus on engagement has been more of an individual thing. It's how can I engage that person, and not really noticing that actually a massive unlock for engagement is the team environment that somebody's in. And so there's a massive correlation between the team climate and the level of engagement that people in that team will feel.
Yep. And hence the level of innovation.
Yes.
So it all builds.
Yeah.
So Alison's creating the space first, the time space, and we can talk about the Advantix model maybe in a minute about how some of that creates the time space, but also the psychological safe space for people to be able to throw ideas out, and it can be okay if it's a bit crap, because somebody else will build on it and somebody else will trigger somebody else's thinking. And creating that psychological safety, I think, is really important too. You can only do that if the team reflects on how everybody is included. And that inclusion of ideas and that engagement, if the team doesn't notice that they're not engaging with everybody, then that never changes and the loud voices always take over. And one of the things that team coaching does is get everybody to notice who's holding the space and how we include everybody and how we can create the psychological safety to get everybody's ideas in there. And as you both said, it's not having the individual one great idea. It's having multiple ideas. When 3M did research on creativity, it's not somebody sitting in the dark in a beanbag for 8 weeks coming up with the next new idea. It's people throwing ideas against the wall.
Help. I mean, goodness.
It's throwing ideas against the wall. Lots of people doing it rapidly is where creativity comes. And we want to create that environment.
Yeah. And I think the other thing it does is it builds engagement, but it also builds resilience. I think, there's a lot of talk about mental health and people's resilience. And obviously, organizations are having problems with productivity and all of that. Teams that are high performing and highly engaged are more likely to be resilient. And as individuals, let's face it, if you're surrounded by other people who challenge you feel safe with, you can tell them that you're exhausted because you didn't sleep that night, or that you need a bit of help, or you spot that somebody else needs something. Those resilient teams are much more likely to have resilient individuals. And we know that being part of a strong community is a great retention tool as much as a productivity tool. And so, I mean, it's a no-brainer to me. I mean, why would you not want to have that? I mean, of the organizations I've left and the teams that I've missed, it's always because of the people and because I was part of a great team. And those are the people that you connect with. And you don't say, oh, I'm really going to miss that work. It's, I'm going to miss those people. And so that's what we're wanting to create with these high-performing teams.
Yeah. What about the skill set within that, Tim? What are your thoughts on, like, if someone wants to become a team coach, what skills do they need in order to make that happen?
So for those of you out there that already do coaching, it's everything you already learn in coaching. So if you've got the ICF set of skills and the ICF competencies of listening and hearing and questioning and not solving for them, but building the capabilities in the individuals. And then it's on speed, because times however many people there are in the team, because it's also noticing not only the individual goals and individual goals and actions, but the interactions of individuals. So you've really got to have your vision up in team coaching. You've really got to be seeing what's going on. And when somebody suddenly, you know, it may be as obvious as somebody crosses their arms and leans back, or it may be far more subtle than that. They just seem a little disengaged or a bit glazed over as an issue is being discussed and they're not contributing. That's when you say, okay, have you guys noticed that this person hasn't spoken? And you're starting to have the conversational skills of bringing people in and commenting on interactions. And those are the extra skills that you need in team coaching, or at least there's some of the ones that I see. Alison, do you see others?
Well, I think also having good group facilitation and understanding systems skills are really helpful too. So, you know, I think people could come at being a team coach from either a one-on-one coaching world or indeed from the sort of facilitation systemic world. But actually you need both sets, and then it's putting it together, which adds another layer of complexity, because when are you coaching and when are you facilitating? There becomes this grey area. So I think there's a whole piece about holding yourself as a team coach and your stance and mindset, which affects your skill level significantly. But it's like the impact you can have on one individual. Imagine what the exponential one is when you have it on a team. So it's wonderful to be part of that energy live in a group.
And that's what I love about it. My number one value is making a difference, and I really feel that in team coaching sessions, probably more than I do actually in one-on-one coaching. I like it more. I enjoy the process more of team coaching. And interesting, I've come from a training background, facilitation background, leadership development background, and the bit that I have found the hardest is knowing when to let go, because you could easily run a whole session and just be facilitating and not really getting to the coaching bit. And actually it's dialing up the coaching skills in those moments so that you are I have to do this, hold up the mirror to the team about what's going on in the dynamics. And that's when the real insight, reflection, action, orientation comes out as well, I think. You
got an example, Tim, of a team you coached that you could share with us and everybody?
There's a few, but the one I really love is I was working with a company called Breville. I think you get them in the UK. They make the coffee makers and the sandwich makers and all that sort of stuff. And they're design teams. So they've each, and just like Jenni was saying before about this bit about teams coming together to solve a problem and then disbanding and coming in different forms. These design teams that they call squads would have a mechanical engineer, a software engineer, a computer person, an interface person, a designer, somebody who's come from graphic design to try and make beautiful products, the marketer people who are saying what the clients want, the manufacturing people saying, well, you can't build it this way. And they're all arguing out the next product. And they all have a different view about what the next product is. And if you don't create the psychological safety in the space for them to have that as a constructive conversation, then some people get left behind and the views are not included. And then you get to the product on the floor and it doesn't work because they've missed something that somebody knew but wasn't willing to speak about. And so it's creating that tension, the resilience in the team to say it's okay that my idea isn't perfect, and that idea of holding on concepts lightly. So if I hold it tight, it's my idea and it's really good, and let me tell you how good it is. If I hold it lightly, I think this could work, but it's open and other people can play with it.
Yeah.
And
the spirit of making it even better than it already was in this world in my head. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the best high performing teams have those discussions. No ego. And they talk about, oh, I'm doing that thing where I'm pushing my idea again. So as you were saying, Sue, before, Jenni, you're handing them that mirror, that reflective skill of not just how they solve the immediate problem and facilitating them solving the problem, but noticing how they are in the team and, oh, I'm pushing too hard again, or I'm not including, or,
so something about self-awareness, noticing how they're behaving in that team environment and being able to self-regulate that, and kind of almost practicing that skill of self-regulation with a coach, so that in the real world they can do more of it. Yeah.
And that's so fun. Getting them to hum as a creative team, that's so cool.
Yeah. Is it particularly hard with what I'm imagining is quite a bunch of quite analytical people with deep technical expertise who, generalizing terribly, tend to like to be the expert and have the right answer? Does that make that collaboration piece harder to create in that environment?
Absolutely. And some of them have come from engineering and there's a right answer. Other people have come from design and there's there's a beautiful answer. So how do you mix the maths of heating a cup of coffee and the machinery and the software with making it beautiful? It's really interesting conversations.
Yes, and deciding what is the most important part of all of that ultimately. So how do you, as a coach, how do you help a team to get to that point? How long does that take as well? If you kind of think about where you started with those Breville teams, like how long did it take them to get to the point of humming? I like that word, humming.
We had 7 sessions with them. We worked with 11 design teams or squads, and we had 7 sessions with each of them, working on the stuff in between as they're actually doing the work. And some of it, and I would like to get to our advantage model, some of it was as simple as how we have meetings and make sure that we're all agreed and we're signing off and there's not somebody in the room that's not agreeing. But some of it's giving them those reflective skills and pausing and just saying, do you feel included at the moment? Have you had an idea that you wanted to say and haven't said? And asking those kind of questions has been part of that process. And giving them those skills, because what we always want to do as coaches is not to create a dependent relationship. So I don't want to be working with Breville in 3 years' time and they can't solve a problem unless I'm in the room. I want them to be able to reflect on their own skills. And by the end of it, they're kind of going, yeah, Tim, we've got this. But we need to have a conversation about the fact that so-and-so keeps pushing this idea and he's not listening to the other people's. And that's great if you can get them to that point.
Yeah, we want to make ourselves redundant, don't we, ultimately, in this process.
So how is this different from the old team building kind of paradigm, Tim, that you could have done with Breville?
I did some work with some banks and finance companies way back in the day where, we had barrels and pieces of wood and ropes and we had to cross a swimming pool. And I remember getting horribly wet, because we all had a lot of fun and we all, we looked at our strengths and we all looked at how we solve problems together, but it wasn't real world. And team coaching is getting them to work on their real problems and on their internal dynamics and talking about, are we having meetings for the sake of having meetings? Are we not saying things as I said? Is there a bottleneck here because we're not feeling safe and we check everything with the boss? One of the teams I worked in Pandora had that as an issue. Okay. And the boss is saying, I want you to make decisions. And they're saying, well, we don't feel safe. And it's like, well, how do we resolve that? So in team coaching, it's talking about our team process. It's not just knowing each other in team building and kind of having fun together.
And getting well.
Performing together.
And some people can make the jump from doing, a ropes activity or an outward bound thing or bowling or whatever, and take it back into the workplace. But for many people, that's a very difficult transition to do. They're like, it's just disconnected. I mean, how's that got anything to do with the real world? And don't like role plays and things like that either. So, I mean, with team coaching, we are talking about the real things the team is working on. It's not some sort of, you can make it interesting and fun to some extent, but it's actually talking about the reality of where the team is and where they want to go, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Real world problems. And how are we in that? How do we interact to solve a real world problem? And stepping back, holding the mirror to it, and looking at how we are in solving real world problems.
Yeah.
The thing I love about team coaching is, as opposed to team building, which I'm not a great fan of, because I'm not a great fan of it because I think it can be quite excluding of some people. To choose an activity that you can do that everybody wants to do, first of all, is going to enjoy, and secondly, everyone can do. They have the physical capability to do, like raft building. You have somebody who's got mobility problems and suddenly they can't swim. They can't take part in that so fully, and so. It's quite tough, I think, to find an exercise that works for everybody. But secondly, that transition back into the workplace is hard. But what I love about team coaching is that you're actually in an environment, maybe off-site somewhere, but you're seeing the team operating as they often would.
Yes.
When you're watching them building a raft, that's not the real environment. Then they're probably not raft builders. There's probably a team out there that does make rafts, but most of the teams that we work with don't. And so you're not replicating reality, I don't think. And whereas in team coaching, you're observing them talking to each other, making a decision, creating an action plan, whatever it might be, you're seeing that in action. And so it's a microcosm of their real world, which I love.
Yes. And then they reflect on that and think about how they use those modalities and heuristics and ways of working when they solve every other problem. And that whole idea of working on the business, not just in the business, because if you're in the business, you just keep solving the problems the same way you always did. And what's our next problem? What's the next problem? When you work on the business, you step back and say, is the way we're working the most effective way? And that's where team coaching really adds about the best value.
And I think, if we talk about Advantix, one of the reasons we came up with the framework was to help teams understand what high performance was and what the edge dynamics were that you needed to consider and use as levers to get yourself to high performance. And as a team coach, it's a really useful framework to communicate with the team, but also to help the team understand those dynamics so that they can see where some of the blockages or interferences are, and also identify which areas they can accelerate and push harder on because they've got that capacity there. So, I mean, what's your thoughts on using Advantix, Jenni, within the team coaching model?
It might be worth us just pausing because some people might not know what Advantix is properly, but it's referenced a lot in the book. A big part of the format of the book is structured around the Advantix framework. It's a framework that we created out of frustration for something holistic that cuts across all elements of team effectiveness. We were quite frustrated because there's a lot of stuff out there for teams, but it's all a bit bitty. There's stuff about relationships. There's stuff about processes for making decisions, but there wasn't really anything kind of catch-all. And so we wanted to create something that was simple and easy to remember, that leaders and teams could use themselves without having to have a team coach. But if you are a team coach, it creates this amazing framework for making sure that you're addressing not just the relationships in the team, but maybe their routines as well, and their reason, their purpose for existing as a team, and the results that they're accountable for delivering. I've just mentioned 4 of them. I've got to mention the 5th, which is resilience, which is the kind of the final piece of the puzzle, which is the team's energy to keep going even when the going gets tough, to bounce back from setbacks, but also to anticipate change that's coming towards the team. So if you're looking at all of those 5 key things as a coach and as a team, you're going to get a high performing team. So those are kind of the nuts and bolts of team performance ultimately. I forgot what the question was, Ali.
It's just wherever you used it, but I mean, I think we've used it. I know that it's really useful in talking to a team in the first place about why would they need a team coach, and what is high performance, and what could the journey look like. And so it really helps set that. And it's then useful to help the team think about, well, where do we want to start? Do we have a reason? Do we know why we exist? And do we know why we intrinsically as individuals are part of this? Have we got clarity of results and so on? So it helps the team then prioritize the areas they'd like to discuss and work on and dig into. So as a team coach, it's really helpful for doing that. And, that's where I found with working with teams, they go into that process and it's really insightful for them. They're like, oh, we thought we nailed that, but actually there's still some gaps in there. And also one leader I remember was working on a particular area of decision making, and it was this question was do the team make decisions when the leader's not present? And for almost 2 years, this leader was trying to get the team to do this and was throwing all kinds of tools and activities, and the team would have these meetings and discuss, not huge things, but they were focusing on it. And finally the dial shifted and he's like, yes, we got you there eventually. Who would have thought? But it was just, part of it is linked to things like psychological safety and trust and clear accountabilities. And until you start digging in deep underneath that, then, these things will pop up. So I think it really helped them focus and drive that performance and see the results. I'm sure.
Yeah, I found it such a powerful tool for it's a framework of. Do you need a glass of water, Tim? Don't die on camera, please.
We don't mind if you leap off and get some water. There we go.
Yeah. Awesome. So this shows it's live, everybody. Live TV.
Yeah.
I just find that having that framework, for me to be thinking about what might be the unlock for this team to get to high performance, and that's when I refer back to the Advantix framework all the time, and think about, okay, so are they really clear about why they exist in the first place? Can everybody articulate that, and they articulate it in the same way? Are people clear about the results that they're accountable for as a team? Often what we find is that individuals are really clear about their objectives. There's not many organizations that let you get away with not being clear about what you're there to do on a day-to-day basis and what you're accountable for as an individual. But many organizations don't think about that at the team level. So they don't think about, okay, why does this team come together, and what do they collaborate on? What are they accountable for delivering together? If it's a leadership, the clue's usually in the name. The leadership team. Leadership might be that. So you're very, very accountable together for delivering, and the culture of the organisation, that they are accountable for ultimately would be another one. But there's probably other things as well that they need to agree, but through conversation and through some focused time together to really. Otherwise, what ends up happening is they end up in their routines of having meetings where they just go around one by one and give an update on what they're working on at the moment, which is ultimately showing them individual accountabilities. And that's really boring, first of all, but secondly, doesn't create collaboration. It doesn't create great relationships and so on. It gets in the way of them.
Yeah. Routines are so sticky and yet so easy to shift and change, and yet we don't. There's so much that just gets in the way. And then that creates all these frustrations with relationships, people sitting through things, acting disrespectfully because they're reading their phone or doing emails in a meeting. You know, that all erodes quality relationships. It also erodes trust. You know, if somebody's not paying attention while you're presenting or talking, then you're going to be thinking they're not interested in me. You make up a whole story about it. And so you can't have a psychologically safe environment if your routines are not supporting that kind of world for them. And yet so often we see these terrible routines, and when you really challenge why they're there, why they're that long, why it happens in that way, there's never a really good quality answer. And if you say, well, why don't you change it, that sometimes feels really hard. It's like, oh, well, what would we do differently? So, you know, I think those are the places where as coaches we can go, it's in your power of influence, because many of these things completely are within the team's range of control.
Especially routines, right? Yeah,
especially routines, yeah.
Yeah.
And the other interesting thing, I think, when we've talked to team coaches is how many team coaches do you not like to push teams on their routines? And you just think, why is that? There is some mental block for all of us.
Yeah. I think probably because we all love the relationship stuff. We're often got into this job because we like helping people to have better relationships with each other. So our natural focus for a coach can be relationships. But I think one of the biggest things we often see in the diagnostic, we've got a diagnostic that looks at those dynamics of high performing teams and assesses the team. The team assesses themselves against them, and the one that often comes out the worst and sometimes for quite a long time is the routines. And yet as you said, Ali, it's such an opportunity for quick wins. You can make really, really simple changes to your routines. It's often in your realm of control. How you meet as a team. You don't need to ask anybody else permission to change how you meet usually.
No.
So it becomes really easy to change that. So, and yet it's often the lowest scoring item or one off.
It's really funny, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I mean, we've got some verbatim bits as part of that diagnostic, which says to people, what do you want to start, stop, and continue in the team? And when you read those, most of those link back to routines as well.
Certainly early on, they do.
Yeah, certainly early on. And so, yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. I've just noticed a comment in the chat from Louise. Brilliant. Hey, Louise, nice to see you. You mentioned rounds. Most people probably won't know what rounds are. So rounds is a PepsiCo tool. It's probably a more generic tool as well. I think it may not be called rounds, but I think it's a lovely tool that can be so powerful in teams, but also in project teams in particular. If you're trying to make a decision about something, if you're trying to get different viewpoints, it's a really inclusive tool. So it's a lovely one. It's a lovely routine actually to have in your team that you do regularly for making decisions. So when I work with teams, I often teach them a version of rounds so that they can get better at being more inclusive and then hearing different voices. So it's called a round because basically you have a problem statement or a decision that you need to make, or a topic you just want to discuss, and then you go round each person in turn and you ask for their thoughts or opinions, and they can do things like build upon a previous person's comment, disagree with another person's point of view respectfully. They can pass. They don't need to say anything at all if they don't want to, but at least they get the opportunity to say something. And so when you've got a bunch of people who could be quite introverted, or some people in the team who could be more introverted than others, and maybe some voices that are louder than others, it just creates this quality of airtime and viewpoints. And then the person who's facilitating it makes notes and can do a little summary of what they've heard. And if you're making a decision at the end of it, you need to then decide how you're going to make that decision and who makes the decision. Is it a voting majority rules, or is it the person who's brought the problem to the team who makes that decision, having heard everybody's points of view? Lots of different ways of making a decision as a result of that. I don't know what the watch out piece was, Louise. So I'm wondering if it's about that kind of, it can get a bit formulaic. I wonder if that's what you meant. And you have to kind of facilitate this quite tightly. Ali, you were going to say something a minute ago. What was it?
Well, I was going to say that I think rounds is a great way to do things, but it's one of the things, if you use that as a tool, is not to always assume that that's the way you're going to do it every time. And so I think it's actually asking for feedback up front. Do we want to use rounds, or do we want to do this a different way? Mix things up, but also help people know that in the team, they also get some choices, and there's some decisions to be made about the process that they use for including everybody and for making decisions. And is this type of process that we're going to do the appropriate one for today, or do we need it to do something else? So I think rather than just always assuming you jump into rounds, I think maybe it's good to check in with the team first.
And keep it alive and keep it exciting and interesting. I think anything that gets boring or formulaic is a deadly thing to happen in a team, and can kind of kill relationships and get in the way of creativity and innovation and collaboration and so on. So avoid it being too formulaic.
I also think there's something there about the team understanding that they need to be agile. So we're talking about, operating in a very collaborative world that's really complex and changing fast. And I think we need to get people not to be fixed. And so one of the ways of doing that is to challenge the team to come up with new ways of working, new ways of sharing, collaborating, doing things, and mixing it up a bit. So, getting people to sit in different seats, and all kinds of things.
Make them out there in a normal environment. Louise has just clarified it was whether rounds is a watch out to people operating as individuals rather than more collaboratively as a team. I think what's quite nice about rounds is if you do have quite an individualistic team or group of people, it edges people towards a more constructively challenging conversation in a really safe environment. So it enables people to have their own individual viewpoint, and for that to be heard. You can set up some careful rules of engagement around this, where nobody can say anything unless it's their turn to speak, for example. They have to listen to other people. If they want to disagree with somebody, they have to do so and point out what they're disagreeing with specifically, but be very respectful about that, and so on. So it's a very constructive way of edging a team towards a more fluid, constructive challenge way of being, which, let's face it, needs a lot of trust, a lot of psychological safety. Tim, you got any thoughts on this one?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think rounds is a way of doing this, and I think, as Alison was saying, but don't do it automatically. Don't do it without thinking about what's the best technique in the moment. I think is really useful too. Rounds sounds like, and I've not used that specific technology, a really good way of including all the voices. And if we're getting that diversity of thought into the room, then that's brilliant. And if we're forcing the team to reflect on whether or not all the voices are in the room, then that's even better.
So talking about why we do it this way might be really powerful up front.
So why do we do this? To get all the voices in the room, to get the dissent, to get the agreement, to build on ideas. That's why we're doing it. And as a routine, not every meeting, but when teams reflect on how they're doing that. So an agenda item, not every meeting, but after every few meetings, are we including all the voices? Are we having constructive dissent? Are we building on ideas and reflecting on that? That's brilliant, because that's the routines about our routines. And we're building a routine to reflect on our routines. And when you've got that, you don't need the coach anymore.
That's what the ultimate, isn't it? That's where we want teams to get to, is they're doing this for themselves. They don't need us anymore. Ali, what about the most difficult skill when it comes to team coaching? What's the one that kind of really has, been tricky for you to learn and continue to learn in your team coaching practice, do you think?
Oh, I think it's definitely managing myself. So my own mindset, my own stance. I think I conquered it in one-on-one coaching. Anybody who knows me, high energy, really pacey, likes to go fast, full of ideas. I love brainstorming. So for me, it was always a challenge in one-on-one coaching to zip it and put all of that away and just be present. And as a facilitator, I get loads of energy from groups, And so I can be bouncing around with the whole group, and I really enjoy that sort of energy. But again, it's about controlling myself and stepping right out of it and holding myself there. And so for me, the whole thing about team coaching and the challenge, you know, while having good facilitation skills and having finally nailed the individual coaching one, is holding myself in that stance. And, you know, reminding myself of my role as I'm just the team coach. And how do I hold things lightly? How do I know when to just step in with a question and just leave it and see what happens? And also to hold my impatience and aspiration. You know, I love massive things. And so a team will go this, and I'm like, what? Okay. But that's me, that's not them. And I think, you know, when you're doing it one-on-one, it's there, but it's multiplied. It's exponential when you've got a group. But I love the dynamic of it, the energy and the ideas that come up, and seeing those connections that deepen and build. For me, it's worth all the effort to hold myself out of it. Why do you do it, Tim?
Same thing. Michael Bungay Stanier calls it fighting the advice monster. So yeah, you're not a consultant. You're not coming in to solve the problems of the team. So holding that and giving them enough time to work on their own processes is sometimes a hard thing when you can see, well, couldn't you just do this? Because this would really work well. So
I know the answer.
But that's fishing for them as opposed to teaching them to fish.
Yeah. Yes.
And if you can teach them to solve their own problems by taking new perspectives, that's where the gold is.
Yeah.
I think there's a real advantage too in monitoring yourself.
Yeah.
Not just so that you can be present in the way you say, but also to use yourself as a tool. And when you notice you're getting a bit frustrated, then that may be reflecting what's going on in the team.
Yeah.
And you can say, guys, I've seen you talk through this 3 times. I'm getting frustrated just listening to this. God, how are you feeling about this? And you know, and if you're frustrated, what's driving that? And so using yourself as a tool can be a really an interesting reverse of using yourself as a problem solver.
Yeah. And a nice mirror back to them.
For me, well, the hardest skill for me, all of that absolutely resonates, by the way. Still work on that every day. And the other one, coming from a facilitation background and training, you know, delivering leadership development training, whatever, where if there's some bad behavior, say someone, you know, gets the laptop out in the session and we've agreed that we would have no laptops present. As a trainer, I'd just go, we've got some laptops out. Can we get rid of them, please? I'd even threatened to throw someone's laptop out the window once before when he just didn't listen to me. You just don't do that as a coach. That's not appropriate. And so reminding myself, it's probably a bit of an extension of your managing yourself, Ali, but remembering that I am just the coach, and therefore it's the team's responsibility to notice that dynamic and do something about it. And I might be able to support that by setting up some nice stuff, like at the beginning of the session, agreeing some house rules where when they say be present, I could dig into that and go, oh, I noticed a lot of laptops out. Is that okay? And then they say, no, we want laptop-free zone. And then later on, if I start to notice the laptops coming out, rather than going, can we put a laptop away, going, just want to check in on our expectations of each other. You know, should we just go through them one by one? And when we get to the be present one, they'll call out the person who's got the laptop out. And then that becomes hopefully the sustainable behavior that they then demonstrate later on. It's a very different approach to poor behaviors that I have to constantly remind myself as a coach in an environment which seems very similar on the face of it to facilitation. So I have to constantly remind myself I'm in coach mode, not trainer mode. That probably brings us towards the end of the session. Tim, Ali, any final thoughts from you in terms of this team coaching thing? You know, the book, the people who are watching here today, what would you like them to take away with them today?
Well, I would just say, if you like complexity and are curious, if you want to make a real impact both on individuals and teams, then have a look at team coaching. It really nails all of those things.
Yeah, lovely. Tim, what about you?
And to double down on that impact, if you really want to have an impact on an organisation, working on the team as a unit rather than just working on individuals just ramps it up a level. And I think also taking that systemic perspective, how everyone interacts, and if that is sexy for you, interesting, ticks your boxes, then you can really get some great intellectual stimulations as a coach, watching how the system changes as the problem changes, and giving that back to the team. And that's so cool. Yeah. So I love doing it. And if you're interested in it, it's a great thing to get into.
Yeah, lovely. And I've just got a few practical things to mention, which is, if you'd like a copy of the book, if you haven't already got one, we've got an offer. If you buy it from us directly, you can get it for $9.99 as opposed to $24.99. So lovely deal for you, including shipping anywhere in the world. Ali's going to show us the book just in case you haven't seen it at the beginning of the session. The link is in the chat now for you to order that. Secondly, just some resources that you might be interested in if you are interested in team coaching and learning more about teams. So whether you're a leader of a team or a team coach or would like to be a team coach, listening to our podcast, which is called The Edge. It's available on all good channels where you normally find podcasts, as well as shortly to be on our YouTube channel as well. So if you look for Management Dynamics, from next week we'll start putting our podcasts on there as well. And thirdly, if you'd like to learn to become a team coach, we run an ICF accredited team coaching program. We're just in the middle of our second cohort at the moment. In fact, we've got a workshop this afternoon with them, haven't we, Ali?
We have.
So if you would like to learn more about that, please do get in touch. There's lots of information on our website as well about the team coaching certification. So basically everything that's in the book and so much more, the opportunity to practice, the opportunity to get some supervision, the opportunity to work with a real team throughout the program and build your team coaching skills to the point where you can get certified and accredited by the ICF, I just think is fabulous. Mm-hmm. So thank you very much, Tim, for joining us today. It's been lovely to have you here. We love chatting to you, and all of your thoughts and ideas are lovely brain fodder for me and Ali. So thank you very much for joining us, and we'll hopefully see you all again soon.
See you soon. Thank you.
Bye.